Hello there. We're here at my personal studio that is a part of my huge mansion that I make with all the money that I earn as a YouTube influencer. Today we're going to be shooting with our Canon cameras using a wide open aperture to get a blurry background and then comparing that to a more closed aperture to have a sharper background. Now, on the cameras that we're going to be using, I've put on our prime lenses. A prime lens is a lens that can't zoom. It's stuck in one position. This is different from a zoom lens like this guy here. If you'll notice with this lens, I can zoom it in and out. See that? Some of the lenses we have are even more powerful zoom lenses. For example, this guy will go from 75 millimeters to 300 millimeters. So anyways, with these lenses you can zoom in more, and also you've got different options. If you're taking a closer up shot, you can zoom out. If you're taking action that's farther away, you can zoom in, and it's kind of adjustable, which is real nice, and oftentimes the zoom lens is what you're going to want to have. The reason why you might prefer a prime lens, however, is because prime lenses usually give you more aperture options. So, for example, with this zoom lens here, if you look at it close, actually, you'll see that the maximum aperture, the widest open it'll get, is a 4 when it's zoomed out, or a 5.6 when it's zoomed in. So you're just limited on how big you can make your opening, your aperture. The prime lens, on the other hand, this guy goes all the way to 1.8. Aperture. Because they don't have to worry about the mechanics of making it a zoom lens, they can devote more of the lens to opening up wider and so forth. I don't know a lot about the engineering behind it, but I do know that a prime lens, the reason why people use prime lenses is because you can have more, usually you can get a more open aperture. And they do have zoom lenses that you can get a pretty wide open aperture, but they're like super expensive, and so anyways. So since we're working with aperture today, we're going to use our prime lenses. Now I'm going to demonstrate for you how to do it, and then we're going to have you give it a try. So we turn on a camera. Let's start with our open aperture. So we want a really low f-stop number. I'm going to go to AV, which allows us to adjust aperture. Hit the Q button, and then I'm going to use the scroll wheel and scroll that aperture all the way to the widest open aperture, 1.8. Now I'm going to then click over to P mode and hit the Q button, and then I'm going to crank my ISO down pretty low, maybe 200 or 400 depending. You might need to fiddle with this. When I do this, I have to kind of check and see, oh, that's too bright, let's lower the ISO. Oh, that's too dim, let's raise the ISO. So I'm going to try 200 here, and let's see what shot we get. Little tip for you with these Canon cameras: if you slightly hold down the button to take the picture, but not all the way, it'll make sure it'll autofocus for you. And then snap it, and okay, there we go. Now I want you to notice something. See how blurry the background is when I take it with this wide open aperture. And again, the subject close to us is in focus, but the background isn't. Now let's say you're taking a picture of something slightly bigger and it's not all in focus. Well, I can just go back to AV to change aperture, hit Q, and then use my go over to the aperture settings, and maybe I use my scroll wheel to pop it up to aperture of f2.0 or 2.2, and then I can get my depth of field will be a bit deeper and more of the shot will be in focus, but I'll still have that blurry background. Alright, now let's try a really small aperture. Let's crank the go to AV and crank it all the way down to f22, which is the smallest aperture that these lenses will do. Now, you're going to have to make a couple of changes here. My ISO is set at 200 right now. If you want, you can try taking a picture at f22 with ISO 200, and unless you're in a really well-lit environment, it's going to come out really dim. The other thing that'll happen is your camera sensing this will compensate by slowing down the shutter speed, and you'll get like a really blurry shot. In fact, why don't I demonstrate that for you now? Okay, so I don't know if you could hear the shutter there, but it was open for like more than a second, maybe 2 seconds, and my picture is super blurry. So to compensate for this, I'm going to do a couple of things. One, I'm going to go back to P mode, and I'm going to hit Q, and I'm going to come over to ISO, and I'm going to crank it up a bit and try a higher ISO. That's going to make the sensor more sensitive to light, and the shutter won't need to stay open as long. Alright, let's try it now. Okay, and you can keep adjusting the ISO and say that one was too bright or too dim. You can, just crank the ISO up or down to get just the right amount that you want, the right amount of sensitivity. But you'll see as you take these pictures that with the f-stop at f/22, your picture's background will be a lot more in focus, and as a result, you'll get you'll just have more of the background into it. Now, one thing that you may need to do is use a tripod with this smaller aperture. I'm using my tripod for the camera that's recording a video, so I'm just going to use this chair to kind of improvise a tripod here and help to steady my hand. And you may have to take a couple of shots to get the right one you want. And of course you can also try fiddling with the shutter speed. If you go to TV, and you can try cranking the shutter speed up or down to make it a faster shutter speed or a slower shutter speed. Anyways, you just have to kind of fiddle with all 3 settings to get what you want. And keep in mind that sometimes the camera will kind of auto-adjust behind your back, and so you have to kind of keep an eye on it. But happy shooting, and good luck. Let's see what shots you come up with.